Okay, we're ready to go. This is about getting, hello? It's about getting your music on the radio. We'll give brief introductions.
Hi, I'm Summer. I'm from TuneIn Radio. We're a service that lets people listen to radio from around the world. And we've got over 80,000 stations, and we're on over 200 devices. So anywhere that anybody is, we want
ready to explode.
Let them listen to their favorite stations and their favorite artists. I'm the head of content for TuneIn, and I've been there for about a year.
That's amazing. So you can listen to 80,000 radio stations at once, ostensibly.
If you're insane, yes.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I'm Phil Sandhouse. I've been around the business for over 30 years, running marketing and record labels, management of artists, David Bowie, Elvis Costello, Rolling Stones in various positions. Bob Catania, go ahead.
I may be one of the most relevant people for this
thank
panel.
God. He's going to talk.
I've been doing radio promotion for 35 years and have my own promotion company now, independent promotion and marketing company. Come from a major label background, and my whole business is about getting songs on the radio. So I hope you guys will have a lot of questions for me.
And I hire him.
Right.
I'm in personal management, artist management, and marketing, and I'm very interested in getting my artists on the radio, but I do not do it myself to any great extent, and never have. But I know the ins and outs of it to a great extent. So that's why I hire him, though.
Right. So we could talk about the state of radio and how how one gets their music on the radio, whether you're an independent or signed through an independent label or major record labels, what the process is. It happens a number of different ways. If you're independent, you do hire people like Bob to kind of quarterback a record, and depending on no matter what genre or format you're going after. We can talk about what it means, how to grow a record through the different radio formats to make a success out of it. But I think maybe we should just open up and see if there's some questions. We'll kind of corral it in topics. Well, unless, Bob, you want to do a little bit of an introduction.
I want to just do a minute, and then I want to address something that this gentleman talked about before. Just to give you guys an idea, getting your song on the radio. It's funny, I've been doing this 35 years, and my mom, God bless her, still doesn't know what I do for a living. She goes, I think my son puts posters up in record stores, something like that, you know. At major record companies, there's a head of promotion, and I've been fortunate enough to be the head of promotion at many labels over the years: Island Records, Geffen Records, Giant Records, Curb, Charisma, probably forgetting a couple.
Were you a Giant when we had Oingo Boingo there?
No.
Oh.
I was there when you sold the company. We had Disturbed.
Sorry. I just want to know if I should blame you or not.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it wasn't my fault. Anyway, what a head of promotion does is he has a team of people, and our job is to take music, come up with a game plan, get it played on the radio. And that's the very simplistic way of talking about it. We obviously have dealings with upper levels of the company, the managers, the artists themselves. What is the right single? What is the game plan? There's all kinds of stuff that goes on. And then we come up with a game plan and we roll it out to radio, and hopefully we get it played. And there has to be a story behind it and a reason why. So that's what I did for most of my life. And then a few years ago, kind of ran out of record companies with the consolidation. 3 labels became one, and 2 labels became one, and then those 3 labels became one. So I started my own promotion company, Right Way Music Group, and the motto there is we do things the right way. And what our service is—
He's in promotion, not marketing.
Promotion, right. So what we do is it's the exact same thing that I did at labels, except now my clients can be entrepreneurs, they can be managers, they can be small companies. They come to me and say, here's our record, what do you think, what is the game plan? And then as a quarterback, which I think is the best term for what I do, is figure out what the record can be at radio, what format it should go to, what the budget needs to be to get the record played on the radio, because you have to hire other teams. And then as a quarterback, I hire teams of people to go promote the record to the radio station. So that's in essence what a promotion guy does. And every record is an individual situation. There's no set thing. People call me up and they go, "What's your fee?" And I go, "Well, I can't tell you what that is until I hear the record, I know what the story is, I can tell you what the budget, needs to be, and if you don't have that budget, then, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to accommodate, what you would like to do." So that, in essence, is what I do, and I'm telling everybody this because most people sort of have no idea what's involved in it. It's just like you turn on the radio and you hear a song and you go, "Oh, that song sucks, it shouldn't be on the radio," or "That song's great, it should be on the radio." So that's what guys like myself try to figure out. Before we got started, this gentleman said something about payola and it takes a lot of money, and I just wanted to say that, and we also talked about, you have to have a great record. So, and that's really, at the end of the day, it really is about the record. Because if you have a great record and no money, you have a chance to have a success because it's a great record. If you have a bad record and a lot of money, you're not going to have a success. The consolidation of radio, the research that goes into what gets played on the radio, the layers of programming people who oversee what gets played on the radio is so intense that nobody will play a record for money. Now, I'm not to say that years ago, before airplay was monitored, and you didn't really know what was getting played, that things were reported to be on playlists that really weren't. But nowadays, because everything is transparent, when a radio station plays a record, I know how many times they're playing it. I know what time of day they're playing it, how much, and all of that. So there's no games to be played anymore. So I was just relaying that I had one client who has all the money in the world. And I was working the project. It was, good enough to be credible, but all the money in the world wasn't going to make it go on the radio, much to the chagrin of my client. I'm giving you, X amount of dollars, you should make it happen. On the other hand, I've had records with, in one of the earlier panels I talked about The Big Bang by Rock Mafia, where the budget was very small, and we were able to have a lot of success because it was a groundbreaking sort of project. There's a current project I'm doing, an artist named Caro Emerald from Holland, and she sold 1.5 million records in Europe, and the budget was, give my partner and I this record for 6 weeks and let's see if anyone cares. And the good news was Sirius Hits 1, which is actually the biggest top 40 radio station in America, added the record and it started selling right away. And again, that was really on very little money. There was no big game plan, but now it opened the door to say, okay, now it makes sense to invest a larger budget in that project. So,
but if I can ask, your question was strictly, I think, about payola.
Yeah.
Not what it takes to make a hit record, but the payola aspect of it.
Yes.
And does it still exist?
Right. That's what I was curious.
Well, and I got what you were saying, and my point was, payola or not, you can't make record a hit. You can't make a record a hit.
Sorry.
Go ahead. And to be honest with you, there really is no payola in the sense of what people think. There are situations where certain people have marketing agreements with radio stations, but after the Elliot Spitzer investigation of the music business, it is so squeaky clean. And the irony of that is, while this guy was pointing fingers at us, he was taking money and going to get hookers and stuff, but as the governor of New York. But it is so tight now with our relationships with radio. In fact, when I send an invoice out, I have to have a disclaimer on there that nothing has been exchanged for airplay. Not that I have anything to exchange for airplay, but I've literally gone to radio stations and sat down in a music meeting with a program director who I've known for 20 years and had to sign a letter, a document, that I would not offer any inducement, you know, for airplay. So they're really, you know, what you think of, you know, here's the 45 sleeve with a $100 bill and it doesn't exist.
That said, the relationship between a station and a promo company is a B2B relationship. How do you maintain, from the station side, how do you feel like you can maintain a healthy relationship with, but establish certain boundaries?
I think everyone just kind of knows the rules these days. There are some radio stations that will say, well, we'll have a marketing arrangement with a company, you know, where, but it's all above board. You know, it's like, we're going to work exclusively with you, you know, and you're going to work with us on helping us market our events and help us get artists for our events and things like that. But it's never in exchange for airplay. It's just a marketing agreement.
I kind of meant outside of Paola.
Right.
I'm not talking about.
See, like, well, with my company, because we quarterback projects and hire people, it's strictly an informational thing. Here are the projects that we're working. We're providing you the information. We're trying to get them to play the record based on the quality of the music and recording back, you know, to a client.
I think some stations fear if they don't play the CDs that certain promo companies give them, they won't get any more CDs from that promo company. I'm not saying that that's true. I'm just saying that that's a fear that a lot of music managers feel.
I had a little record company in the 90s, and we had an artist named Michael Damian, who was on a TV show then. He was a fairly big name then. He had a #1 record when we put out a follow-up album. And I never did promotion, but we had, I can't remember who it was who did promotion for us. But I got a phone call one day saying I can get the record on so-and-so station, but the guy needs 2 VCRs. And I said, buy them. We can get, I mean, the guy needs, you know, so it used to happen a lot, but you're saying it's just not at all anymore?
It's because of the whole Elliot Spitzer thing,
Yeah.
everything is pretty...
Yeah, not just to get digressed, but I know that then it comes down and there's always figuring out a way how to get around it yet again, and it'll pop up again. And then I heard after even that the sponsored concert shows, that's how you know, we'll pay the expenses, the artist will show up, you'll make the money, you'll get the promotion, but of course we want the airplay.
Yeah, which
It's soft way of
it
doing
still
it.
goes on,
Right.
although a lot of people rebelled a little bit because you'd have major, you know, Green Day level artists doing free shows, and the station was making money, and everybody was,
right.
But the artists would show up, and but the idea was they'd get played again.
Exactly.
It was not stated, if you do our show, we'll play your record.
It's implicit.
The understanding was there.
I think to her question specifically, before I got into technology and whatnot, I worked for an indie record label.
Which
and a very small one. It's called ABB Records. We did Dilated People's little brother, Tafari. And at the same time, I was working for a college radio station and a record pool. So I kind of had all 3 points. And I would say
You were conflicted all over the place.
Yes, it continues today.
Yeah.
And I would say...
You were born that way, my dear. That's a whole...
Oh, you have no idea.
We
and I would say, I would feel it, I think on every end, I hear exactly what you're saying, especially and I think you're from a college station when you feel like you don't have a ton of power to begin with. What I saw personally, and of course I don't want to make generalizations, is if I saw when we were getting a record out that there were particular stations that just never played anything we sent, then I thought there was something deeper there, that there just wasn't a connect between us and that station, that you just don't play our kind of music. But if I saw that every once in a while you played a record of ours and not others, then I just sort of respected that you made a decision about a particular record. Right, and then on the flip side, if you always played our records, I mean, great, obviously, but you know, it was a little less fulfilling for me creatively as a young, annoying.
Our station's really talking about developing our sound, but we add everything that Terrorbird sends us. So are we ourselves, or are we Terrorbird?
Or do you really like what Terrorbird puts out? Because they put
I think
out
we
pretty
do.
good. Yeah.
I think that some of that has to do with the quality of what Terrorbird is sending us in terms of promo, but.
And I know those guys, like I think they generally.
Well, you know, that becomes the business end of it, which is, we talked about a little bit, and the last thing is your college station.
Yes.
you know, if you're treating it as a business, what is your identity as a brand? Who's your listener? What music are you playing for them? What's their lifestyle? And then that plays to what you're going to put on air, what advertisers you could bring in, knowing your consumer, knowing your listener. So it plays into that, you know.
The one thing that I always tell people over the years, and we've kind of, and Mike kind of knows this, we've lost this over the years, there was a lot more label radio station interaction in the earlier days. I mean, I used to have budgets, and I spent probably 20 years of my life traveling 125, 130 days a year visiting radio stations because I had a connection with these people. I've seen the USA, you know. Nowadays, there's no budgets for that, so a lot of it is, you know, there isn't that connection anymore. And I said in the previous panel to another woman in there from a college station, you know, like she was questioning, you know, do the labels really care? I said, but it's also incumbent upon you in a position at a station, if you're the program director or music director, if there's something you're really digging, pick up the phone and be proactive.
Make them care, make them pay attention to you.
Call them up and go, we're playing this record and we love this record, and you know, I can talk to our concert board and we should bring the band in, and we'd love to have the artist come in and be on the radio station. And I was relaying the story of, I had a kid 25 years ago, used to call me from his station. I didn't ask him to, just kept calling me at RCA, and I ended up hiring him to be the head of college promotion, and he's a senior VP of promotion in Nashville these days. But because he picked up the telephone and made a connection. And when I was in college radio, I was, instead of being more interested in figuring out how I was going to get on WMMR or WNEW at the time, it was like, hey, I want to be the guy that's promoting records. How do I figure that out? So I was calling up, you know, record companies and going, we're playing your records. And, you know, that's how I got started in this business. So.
And again, to Bob's point, it was a different era where, you know, we used to break records and break careers regionally. You know, and be it in a region or a couple of different regions. And record labels were structured where we had promotion men in the region, talking with marketing people and dealing with the promoter, dealing with the club owner, dealing with the local commercial station, dealing with the local college station, and four-walling, we used to call four-walling the marketplace to get everybody on board and believing in and bring the artists through to do interviews, to do a show, and then you start selling records and you grow from there. And that was the process back then.
I will say this as a general rule of thumb. It's not at every single company. When you get to the Interscopes and Columbias, they've got so many layers there. But if you're talking independent artists and small labels, I guarantee you someone at that label will be thrilled if somebody picks up the telephone and says, we're interested in your record. Because I even struggle with it on mid-level projects. Somebody will go, I want to bring the artist to LA. What can we do with the artist? And you look around and go, wait, there's nothing to do. You know, there's no trade magazines anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Kiss FM and K-Big don't want to see you unless, you know, you're a multi-platinum artist. So when somebody's calling up going, we want to do something with your artist, you know, we're all about it.
It's a good point about you. I talked to you in the last panel about treating it more of your own business and being a little entrepreneurial and connecting a couple of dots with either the local, I'm sure you speak to your college newspaper and the local club owner, or if you're doing it on campus, a concert commission, and four-walling your own events and building your self-promotion and increasing your listenership and audience and taking a piece of, you know, promoting a show or something and calling the indie label, which may help to get the band in and blow something up for you if you get a reaction.
All that'll happen out of that is you'll end up with a job at a radio station or a record company,
or an agency or a management company.
It'll happen, trust me.
Or an app company, or
whether you want it or not.
Well, yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
Do you mind opening this up a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure,
Go ahead.
So I'm just wondering, what are record labels doing to adapt, if anything? What with Nine Inch Nails, Radiohead being able to release albums just by themselves and just saying, hey, give us whatever you can to buy this. And what with this summer, you were lucky if you could go a day without hearing Carly Rae Jepsen. And she really didn't have anything going on before that. So I'm just wondering what they're doing to adapt to the changing music scene.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
You can-
Go ahead, and I'll jump in.
There was a great story about, and this is in defense of the major labels, okay? I spent a lot of time there. Someone talked about Radiohead when they put that release out and said, just pay us what you want. Somebody had a great comment about that. In order to do that, first, be Radiohead.
Right.
They had a record company that invested millions and millions of dollars over many, many years to get them to the point where they don't need the record company anymore.
Ironically.
I just read today, Metallica got all
Yes,
of their
masters
got
back.
all their masters back. Goodbye, Warner
Warner
Music,
Brothers,
Warner Brothers,
yeah.
and we have our own label. But that's Metallica, so that they can do that.
But labels don't do that anymore.
What's that?
Don't do what anymore?
Labels do artist development a lot less. than-
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but well,
Oh, yeah,
I think
very
that's
much.
very
Well,
true.
what I
We'll
was-
get to that point.
Yeah, what I was talking about is the Radiohead model. You have to be at that level. One of the artists I've worked with for many years is Melissa Etheridge. I worked her from dragging her around the radio stations for 2 years with her guitar. She's at a point where, she's been through the major label thing, millions of dollars have been spent. If she doesn't need a label anymore, she could, Island keeps giving the money, but,
Yeah, I know,
but
yeah.
she could go, because she's an established brand, she could go do that and go melissaatheridge.com. She knows who her fan base is. So that part of the business is always going to be there with the bigger acts that have the brand behind them. The Carly Rae Jepsen is really
It's a
simple.
different, it's two different situations,
Yeah.
actually. Go ahead.
And I would say
I'll
that's
address it, too.
her manager, Scooter Braun, is
Beavers.
Justin Bieber's manager, so he's a manager with phenomenal clout, and he walks in the door and says, I've got this other artist, and so does that make the record a hit? No, but it makes the record a priority.
But it happened
because
to be
the-
a hit.
What?
It happened to be
And
a
then it
hit.
turned
Happened
out
to
to
be
be a
first
hit.
hit.
I mean,
But-
that record was a hit. All the research from the sales and research that radio stations did justified that record being as big as it was.
But maybe more to your point, and were you in the last panel?
I was.
Yeah, so, and we got into it a little bit, is that the tendency of most of the major labels right now is to play to either the teen pop scene, or urban hip hop, or crossover records, who that rely on them as being banks. Banks for marketing, banks for videos, banks for radio promotion. If you're talking more alternative, and where those kinds of alternative rock, they're happening outside the major label systems. Again, the Mumford & Sons, or Arcade Fires, or Passion Pit. Those projects are happening for the most part outside of that. We're going to have those long-term careers, more dedicated, more artist development, starting small, starting regional, and growing outside the major label system. So does that answer your question a little bit?
Basically, what I'm worried about is, are record labels still relevant, and is that a viable path?
Yes, it depends
Yes.
on, I believe it depends, and these guys may have different opinions. It depends on the genre of music you're really into. I think if you're an alternative artist, an alternative rock artist, you look for the indies or do it yourself. If you're, a major pop act and that's your genre and that's your sound, or urban or hip hop, then the major labels and that budget and that backing and that marketing is where they're at. That's what they want to know. They want to roll $2-3 million on rolling out a Katy Perry project or Carly Rae Jepsen pop type of artists, and that's what they're interested in backing. I'm hearing now that Columbia Records is starting to look more towards artist development.
Well, the thing with labels, how I look at it anyway, is a well-financed indie label or a major label, which is a well-financed major label, can get your artist up to a level where you might be able to go on from there. And I don't mean even Radiohead level. There are other levels that other artists, but you've got to make sure you do the deal up front that's only for a couple of years. And there aren't many labels that'll do that.
Right.
But so they're not going to put millions of dollars into an artist unless they know they've got that artist around for a while and get their millions of dollars back. But I have pulled it off a couple of times, and particularly in Europe, where I was able to make a really short-term deal, and it did introduce the artist on a level that I couldn't have done, and now we go from there, you know, whatever the case might be. So it can happen, but the problem is you can, with a label, get stuck. But the other side of the coin is you talk about, no matter what level artist you're talking about, if you're going to do it yourself, or if you're going to sign to an independent label, there's an amazing amount of work to be done. And a lot of bands either don't know how to do that or just aren't together enough to do that. You've got to have a team. You got to build your own label, even though it may just be your music. You've got to have somebody who's running that day to day and knows how to call a guy like Bob and knows how to put a team together when they're putting out a record and finance it, or it's not going to work. So it's easy to say, you know, I mean, Radiohead did it, and Bare Naked Ladies did it, and you know, there are other art now, Metallica, but Metallica, the company and the people behind Metallica are great businessmen. So there's no problem with Metallica.
They're ostensibly a self-contained management / record label because of the years of experience and the economy of scale that a Metallica, Radiohead, they can do it all.
And a
they
huge
know
amount of money.
And a huge amount of money to fund and finance
So,
it. They know how to do it.
It's easier said than done about going out on your own. But so there's good and bad aspects to either one, and you've got to, people like in my position have to make sure negotiations at the beginning allow for something like that 2 or 3 years or whatever down the line, or it won't work.
I know there's a couple questions.
Right.
I just want to make one quick point. One of the things that I live with every day in doing what I do is the consolidation of major radio companies. I don't know if you all went to the keynote. CBS, Clear Channel, Cumulus, there's Entercom. There's 3 or 4 major corporations that control 90% of radio. They have very strict rules about how they conduct their business, which is why they'll pay all of, you know, no program director is going to jeopardize his $200,000 a year job to take a DVD player, you know. It's just not going to happen, or mess up his radio station. But what has happened is the major labels are in such serious business with these big corporations. It used to be the guy in Philadelphia was my buddy. Now it's the head of Clear Channel programming is buddies with the head of Big Machine Records, who has Taylor Swift.
They're doing a deal.
And they have a deal together where there's revenue sharing and partnership. So what happens is the major label relationship to the record company, to the radio companies, is really stronger than it's ever been. So when you have an independent record, you get to a certain level, and then the big radio stations, they go, you know, it's not on one of the big labels. Are they really going to have the ability to bring this record to the level that we need to see it at? So that is part of the frustration that I have with, you know, and I'm trying to get to your point in a roundabout way. It's very difficult to get to those bigger radio stations because corporately they're controlled. Right. And I had an example of Michael Fronte and Spearhead had a song called Say Hey, I Love You. It was on Epitaph Records, a brilliant label, rock label. Mm-hmm. They really didn't know what they had with this. They called me in and I said, you have a pop hit. And it got to a point where it was clear that record was going to be a hit. And big market radio stations were saying to me, you know, Bob, this record's a hit. It's a shame it's not on a real label. And I go, what are you talking about? It's on a... But what they meant was they wanted it on Universal or Columbia or Interscope. And what Epitaph did is they sold the record to Universal. And 2 weeks later, it was on 50 more radio stations. Because
Crazy.
Then there was that comfort level.
Well, why did they say that? What's the difference to them what label it's on?
Because they're in business now. You know, Universal Republic is bringing them 10 acts a year for their shows and things like that. So they don't want to be in business with Epitaph Records. They don't know who that is. They don't know.
It's just implied leverage in a different way.
I'll ask a naive question. If they think it's a hit, and they think it's got its own merit, and it happens to be on Epitaph, which is a quite legitimate label.
Absolutely.
It's not a huge label, but it's a legitimate label.
But the pop stations don't know the label.
So tell them to go find out about the label and play the record and shut up. I don't get the.
Yeah, right. Oh, well, by the way, we had that discussion, but it's interesting how it changed.
Mike, you're too
How it
old
changed.
to be this naive.
Yeah.
No,
It changed.
I understand what he's saying, but
Oh,
I
I
still
hear-
feel it.
Yeah.
But I don't promote records, so I can tell them to fuck
Right,
off.
yeah.
Exactly, I hear you. But this is the crazy part of it. It's completely nuts.
I guess this is like a dual question, but you brought up Passion Pit, and I think that that's a good example. So Passion Pit blew up without radio play, and that was when they were on French Kiss, which was a label that was started by Leslie Fake so that they wouldn't have to be on a record label,
Right.
and then they just started signing their friends. And that was a great year for French Kiss. They also had a bunch of other famous
Right,
artists, Tiger,
right.
Dodos, whatever. But Passion Pit is now on a major label, and outside of that single getting fantastic radio play this summer, that album has bombed.
Fair enough.
And I've worked with 2 different independent labels, and every artist we ever upstreamed the contract either got shelved indefinitely at the major, or the major did something really terrible in marketing them that made them lose their core audience. So then my question is,
She's too smart.
if Passion Pit can get that big without commercial radio play, does commercial radio play still matter? And in that case, I would say Passion Pit made a huge mistake by leaving French Kiss.
You're probably right, and but listen, listen, Radiohead, given these career type rock artists, Radiohead, look, I want to think of something new, but Arcade Fire is going to be around for the next 20 years. How much more commercial top 40 radio play they're going to get? Probably not a lot. They're not that kind of band. They'll kind of creep in and creep out like those bands do, but they'll probably stay independent. So
Well,
it's
I
a
think-
case by case.
Yeah,
But
I think in the case of that band, it's probably a mistake to go to major labels.
Sure.
I mean, I've worked at labels my whole life. I've seen bands come up from independent labels and hey, we signed this band, and I'm like, this is probably a mistake because this is not the system for a band like that. When I worked at Island Records in the 80s, I mean, we had a lot of success, thankfully, but we were still a boutique label. We still
Right.
put out 8 or 10 records a year.
What label?
Island.
Oh, yes.
And and Chris Blackwell, on the label, we were in there. We're working U2 till they break, and you're not going to be distracted by 12 new releases next month. That I want you to work U2 and Robert Palmer and Melissa Etheridge, and that's all you're going to do until they break. And that's what independent labels do. And I've had artists on the labels that are like, when I've worked for some small independents, going, if we were on Interscope, we'd be blowing up right now. And I go, if you were on Interscope, you would have
you'd
been
be
dropped.
lost with 200 other acts. You'd be
would have
lost.
been, you would have been dropped
Dropped
the last
also.
week because they have to put out 12 records
Yeah.
a month.
And they have the attention span of a gnat, instead of saying, we're going to break it and stay with it for a year.
Does it seem like A&R is dying art?
Is A&R dying art? Well, I think it's the rise of independent labels who, what used to happen, and these guys have both worked and been a part of it, the major independents. I came through a major label system. I pride myself being an artist-driven executive. Those guys who did the A&Ms, the Islands, they were really A&R guys who ran those labels. They were astute. They picked artists they believed were going to have long-term careers. So
That's
maybe
what happened. Lawyers took over.
Yeah, exactly.
Lawyers and corporate guys.
And
I mean,
MBAs.
they started buying up all these labels,
And consolidating.
and they were corporate guys and suits. They were not A&R and artist-oriented guys for the most part. And you hear these horror stories of bands being signed, and they give them $1 million, and they make the record, and they're dropped before the record even comes out. That's a corporate decision.
Yep.
It's got nothing to do with art or music or fans or whatever the case might be. And that's the chance you take when you go on a major label. But to slightly digress, if I was managing that band and that band got all this press because they were dropped because they not released the record, I'd say thank you for the PR, and we'll now go and sign somewhere else. And
Right.
So it's
Exactly.
you make it into something.
So there's examples of exactly what you're saying, right, where they might not have made it to like the next Bieber level, but like my example, ABB Records, Dilated Peoples, we did pretty well by them, but the fact that some people in this room might know who they are, that's Capitol Records.
Right.
Or, Hieroglyphics and Dell and Souls of Mischief. All those guys were on major record labels, and so they might not be like the household names, but they now have 20, 30-year careers at a certain level where they are supporting themselves, and there's some value in that.
What's happened at labels, there is definitely, the A&R focus has been lost by a lot of labels, and what I'm about to tell you has happened for all time. I've seen this my whole career. An A&R guy signs an artist to a label. That's a very personal connection. The A&R person brings them in, and over the years, the danger at any level, at any label, at any level, the A&R guy gets fired. That band, you're out the door. You know, when I worked at Geffen Records, I was fortunate enough to be there during the time of the great triumvirate of Tom Zutaut, John Kolodner, and Gary Gersh, who each had their fiefdoms, and they were the most powerful three guys in the company. But you know,
it's an artist-driven, A&R-driven company.
So those guys would come in my office and go, Bob, here's our priority, you know, and there was no debating it because they were so successful. And I mean, and I love that. It was like, you know, you're going to give me great records with great A&R, but if that guy got fired, if Tom Zutaut got fired or something, would Guns N' Roses have been the priority that he made it to be because of his power within the company?
But to your point, I think it's a number of these independents that are out there now, labels, who have certain guys or women at the top that are their own visionaries, their own A&R sense. They like a genre, they want to back a genre, they love a style of music, a regional thing, and they're the new A&R guys. I think there used to be an era where even the major labels were kind of divided up between a very marketing-driven label where artistry and A&R was second, and a lot of the labels like Geffen and Warner Brothers out here, which are very A&R music-driven. They had Warner Brothers used to have 10 of the top record producers on staff that used to nurture bands, record records. That doesn't happen anymore. So, you know, it was a different era and different time, but I think, again, you see it in the independent scene now more than ever.
The good news right now is in the past couple of months, I'm sorry, I'll get to your question. I don't know the names, but one of the guys that started Danger Bird.
Jeff, who moved over Atlantic.
To Atlantic, and then one of the guys who started Fueled by Ramen is now running.
Those are two great.
Those are guys that are now running major labels. So the hope is that guys who created those small independent labels, artist-driven, long-term focus on marketing and promotion, are now moving into the major labels, and the guys at the very top are going, maybe we don't put a lawyer in charge this time, or an accountant. Maybe we should bring a music guy in.
Or the independent stays the independents, like Merge, or Vagrant Records down here with John Cohn, who's got his, Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros and a couple of great bands, and they're out there.
You made a point about if commercial radio is so important at all. I think TuneIn obviously really, really believes in radio. That's why we do what we do. And there is something really special about that mass audience that people can connect to and go back to work, and the next morning you had that shared experience. That said, you have to be realistic that more and more every year there are more and more opportunities for people to get distracted. And they are spending more and more time on tons of different platforms. And as an artist, you just have to think about where your audience is. And so you don't want to be completely focused on getting on commercial radio. You have to think about something like TuneIn or Instagram or Facebook. Get creative. We've got artists and labels like Wu-Tang. They started their own radio station. They're on TuneIn. Public Enemy started their own radio station. They're on TuneIn. Talking to several labels who may want to do the similar thing. And something like TuneIn, technology allows you to transform that radio experience. So you can actually come and tune in, search for an artist, and it'll pull up all the radio stations in the world playing it. Now, if you're just focused on commercial radio, you're not going to show up in that search. But if you get creative and you say, I'm going to start up a radio station that's dedicated to my indie label or to my stable of friends who are creating music, and all of a sudden TuneIn has 40 million monthly active listeners. When someone who knows you or has heard of you goes and searches for you on TuneIn, you show up. Whereas you were stuck in that mindset of, I've got to get on my local pop station, or hip hop station, you're never going to show up. And this is a completely new platform where your audience is.
Yeah, cool. Good night.
This probably pertains to you, Bob, but would your company be the best way for jazz artists to reach Clear Channel, some kind of syndicated company that owns a zillion jazz stations around the country.
I'm not the company, but there are companies who do jazz promotion.
And do you have the names, or what would be the best way?
I think there was a company called All That Jazz. I would just Google it, to tell you the truth. There's not much jazz on the radio anymore because the new rating systems, the people meters, just do not
But each
make
city,
that.
each major city has a wave station that's owned by Clear Channel,
Right.
and that kind of helps.
Right.
You know?
But I don't know jazz music enough to say that I would be comfortable working at, but there are promotion companies that specialize
There's
in
very
that.
little money in it, so you're not gonna find too many people doing it.
Right, yeah.
Doing it.
That's the problem, yeah.
Okay.
You know. But by the way, I just want to tell you, on commercial radio and why it's still important, because I look at monitoring reports that show, there's a couple of companies that monitor radio airplay, and they pardon me?
Do you think your Arbitron's really accurate?
Well, I'm talking about, well, here's what there's two companies, MediaBase and BDS, who monitor airplay. They marry airplay information to the Arbitron ratings of a radio station, and the combination of the spins and the times that they get spun are factored into the Arbitron ratings. So if Z100 in New York plays your record at 9 o'clock in the morning, they go 1.2 million people are listening. If they play it at 4 in the morning, it might be 300,000 people. But we can look at audience reach on every record to see how many people we're reaching each week. And a smash hit Carly Rae Jepsen type record in a given week can generate 1 billion with a B impressions, which is why those radio stations are so important, and that's how Adele sells 10 million, or a Carly Rae Jepsen single sells 5 million, and probably there's 25 million illegal downloads of that because.
But at that point, it doesn't make a difference.
Right.
It
So,
does make a difference financially.
oh yeah.
Of course it does.
Yeah, right. But
It does make a
In
difference
this
to their
world?
career, but.
right.
Yeah, it's.
And actually, it talks about what we were into earlier, which is setting up an artist's career. You know, she's got a career now for years to come if she doesn't ever have another hit. And the 25,000 or million or whatever it was downloads allow that. Even though she or the record company didn't get paid for those, she can go and tour for a long time.
Who, Carly Rae Jepsen?
Yeah,
You think so?
yeah.
See, I don't know, I'm not convinced she has a career for a long, long time. but-
She may not play.
That one song, she gotta have a couple more.
If she has a
Well, no, but
I think so.
she may not headline arenas, but she will have a career for years to come.
because of that hit.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah,
You know,
You know, she may play the Wiltern instead of the Forum or whatever the venue. You know,
yeah,
but
and she may be playing only that song for the next 20 years.
It depends. But you're right. If she has a
I'll
follow-up.
take it.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I get that, yeah.
The artist I was talking about earlier that we're going to launch in North America, if he has one hit, it's fine with me. We're doing fine for the next.
Yeah, but I trust that you believe that he's going to have many more hits.
He's gonna
and
have
great-
lots of hits.
Lots of hits. I don't trust that she's going to have lots of hits. Just my guts tell me.
Okay, I trust he's going to have lots of hits. If it turns out I'm wrong and he only has one, I'm still happy.
I don't know, that's granted, I get that.
We got the 5.
I'm just not
Yeah,
as
we got
happy.
fucking
You're good music critic.
Who? Me? No, I'm just a cynic. After all these years.
That's what happens after all these years.
No, I started that way, it's a problem. That's why I'm not in the major labels
There's somebody
anymore.
else has a question.
Oh, no, you're doing fine.
And then we got maybe the last question, but because we've got run out of time, go ahead.
Oh, so, but if you got your song on K-Jazz, that's nationally syndicated even though it's not commercial. Public radio is increasing music airplay. NPR music is blowing up, and that's just in the last.
What kind of music is blowing up?
Public radio.
Public, yes, that's right.
As different from college radio, but public radio is in stations affiliated with American Public Media or NPR or something like that, are getting more and more into the music game. How is that going to impact music radio and commercial music radio?
It's still a specialty format.
Right, still.
It's very specialty oriented. So the major labels may have a person or two who deals with that, probably in their adult alternative
Yeah.
department, but it's not a main focus.
If they become tastemakers and start to break acts or discover a genre or a style or a segment of the marketplace or a psychographic or a demographic that I believe non-com or non-commercial is kind of catering to, either age, demographic, and it starts to blow up and sell a lot of records, people are going to start paying more and more attention to it. I think it's great. I feel it's coming. I understand what you're saying. I think more and more people are discovering music there than any other place. If it starts to break acts, then yeah, more people.
What's great is what's happening
Right.
here in LA with KCSN, because you have
Exactly.
Sky Daniels and Jim Nelson, who was on the last panel, who come from a commercial radio background. Sky had many years in the music industry.
But priding
So-
themselves in discovering and breaking
Right.
new sounding
But
music.
they're doing it in a way that is more commercial. You know, what their point is, we're not really helping anybody by adding a record and playing it 3 times a week.
Right.
You know, so they're going to say, we'll play less new music, but we'll play it more so it has an opportunity to be heard by people and then have an impact. And I think if they're successful, then you'll see the copycats of that. People will go, oh, look at what happened there, and then more people will do that. But there's some great, WXPN in Philadelphia is a great brand.
From the WSPN area.
Right, I grew up in Philadelphia, and I've been to their facility, and,
Okay.
you know, their airplay is never gonna really break a record, but if they become
An
your
influencer.
if they become your partner,
Right.
and they play the record, and they bring your band in, and you're doing a concert with them, and you're
I think it's
interacting.
great for local artists.
Yeah, right.
Locally. And
But
that's
I
an
mean,
example of an old school way.
Right, yeah.
They promote Philadelphia-based artists that get big in Philly, but just on XPN.
Yeah, right.
Right.
But I mean, the thing, like KCRW in town here, it amazes me. I mean, there'll be some band playing at Troubadour, which is 500 seats, and I've never heard of them. And I ask somebody, and they go, yeah, they're on KCRW.
Oh, yeah, that's what's happening.
Or even the Wiltering, which is 2,500. I may have heard of them at that point, but I didn't realize they were big enough to do that. And that could be one radio station, but now there's 2 radio stations.
Right. Mhm.
And actually there's, what is it, 100 points, the Sound?
The sound,
Right.
yeah, well, they're more classic
But
hits.
Yeah,
this
they
sound-
are.
But this
Right.
is reminiscent of old school situations where you'll have kind of alternative station playing, and that's what I've been the same phenomenon. And they're playing it, and I may not heard of the band, but they're selling out. Troubadour or Wiltern or in the other venue up on Wilshire, between the
Roxy?
The great
No,
part
no,
is that
not on
they're-
Sunset.
Oh,
El Rey,
no.
the El Rey.
They're breaking
Oh, right.
regionally, but they
Yes.
have global reach
But-
through their
Yeah.
own.
Exactly, and to your point-
And the other thing that's cool is that at one time, I don't know if this is still true, but a couple of years ago, KCRW's second biggest market was London, England.
Believe it.
You know, because
Right.
of the internet.
Right.
They had LA and then London and then New York, and they actually started presenting shows in New York. And what's the one out of Seattle? A station out of Seattle?
KXP.
Hmm?
KXP.
Is it?
Yes,
Yeah, and they were doing that too, and it's
Huge brand.
so they're
Right.
like anything else, is a silver lining in that if you do latch onto those stations, you're getting a great deal of exposure. It's just sometimes hard to keep up with.
Download TuneIn, it's easier.
Anything else? Any other questions?
I want to hear about 80,000 radio stations.
Yeah.
There's something for everybody.
Wow. And do you suggest if you like this or
Yeah.
not? Oh, that's, oh my God, great, I gave my band on your station. Any other questions, guys? Hope this was informative, hope it helped.
Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
Great, thanks, guys, thanks a lot.
Can I get your picture sense?
Thanks a lot, good luck to you.
Thank you. Thanks for being.